Chapter 13, Meeting the Cakes. Guest Chapter. This chapter was written by Portal82. I'd like to thank Captain Chris Sandwich for editing it. Today Twilight planned on meeting up with some of her friends at Sugar Cube Corner. I, as usual, tagged along behind her, on my leash and collar, towards our destination for the day. It was a sunny morning and was scheduled to be for the rest of the day, but I would have preferred just to stay home in my comfy bed and sleep a little more. Home. Yeah, it was my home now. Twilight had dragged me out of bed and had used her secret weapon to make me come with her. It's that damn puppy dog stare. Seriously? Does every female pony have that ability? I had seen some other ponies use it. The worst ones were those 3 fillies that called themselves the Cutie Crusaders. I saw them use it on a stallion when they operated a stand in the market. Selling apples, I think. So, if this is an ability all mares have, then the stallions are screwed, myself included. How could one's eyes get any bigger? And let's not forget that pout. I know they fake those tears, but I can't help it. My defenses crumble like a house of cards. So here I was, being led toward Sugar Cube Corner, still with some sleep left in my eyes. Have I ever told you that I hate mornings? Twilight looked over her shoulder towards me, rolling her eyes.
Oh, hush. It's 9:30. It was about time for you to get up anyways.
I'm still tired. We were up pretty late last night. We had another Q&A session about my world and hers the previous night. There is seriously no way to satisfy that mare's curiosity. We finally saw Sugar Cube Corner ahead, and soon we were right in front of the door. Unlike most places of business in Ponyville, Sugar Cube Corner didn't have a no humans allowed policy. Humans were allowed inside, if they could behave. The cakes had a special corner made for the humans to be placed. It had leash hooks, water, and food available to them, as well as slightly worn-out cushions. I've been in the corner 2 times before now, and it wasn't half bad, actually. Without a word, Twilight trotted inside with me in tow. She placed me in the human area, which was empty at the moment, thank God, then headed towards the table nearby and sat down. Looking around, I blinked the sleep out of my eyes. The store looked just like any other bakery back at home, with all the sugary goods displayed on shelves as well as under the counter, with a register perched on the countertop. A lanky stallion with a yellow coat and an orange mane sat behind the counter. He had a cutie mark depicting 3 slices of what appeared to be carrot cake with white icing. Seeing Twilight, he turned his head towards the kitchen door behind him. "Honey bun, Twilight is here." Coming out from the door was a mare with a light blue coat and 2-toned mane with 2 shades of pink, and a tail to match. Her mane and tail were styled like ice cream frosting. She had a cutie mark of 3 cupcakes on her bigger-than-average flanks. She looked to be on the chubby side, which was unusual, as most ponies I've seen had little to no fat. She looked to be the motherly type, one that was always ready with a plate of cookies and a glass of lemonade when children were near. My eyes drifted lower, and I immediately felt my face heat up. Despite being naked, ponies don't typically expose their privates for all to see. I don't know how they do it, but they do. I've been in this world for several months and very rarely do catch a glimpse of anything, well, private. Granted, I haven't exactly been trying to look. That being said, I couldn't help but notice that her teats were slightly swollen, swaying slightly as she walked. She was lactating, most likely. Blushing heavily, I tore my gaze away. It may be a common sight for ponies, but for me, it still is a bit awkward. As she approached us, she smiled at Twilight.
"Hello, dear. How are you this morning? Are you here to see Pinky?"
Hello, Mrs. Cake.
Twilight said, smiling at the motherly mare.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I am. Is she upstairs?
"Yes, dear, and so are the others. They will be down shortly."
Turning around, Mrs. Cake turned towards her husband, who was still managing the register.
"Carrot, honey, I have to get back to the kitchen and, finish using the machine, so the twins have something for later today."
I felt my face heat up more at that. I was never comfortable with this kind of thing back home either. "Okay, honey bun, I can handle the shop for now." Mrs. Cake turned, headed back behind the counter, and slipped back into the kitchen. As she made her exit, I couldn't help but glimpse at her behind and swollen teats again. I don't know why I was looking there, but I didn't have much time to think about it. As soon as Mrs. Cake left, I heard voices coming from the stairs near the kitchen door. Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy, and Applejack came trotting down the stairs, talking happily amongst themselves. As they drew near, I saw that Pinkie also had 2 foals on her back, a female unicorn and a male Pegasus. Oh my God, let me tell you, they were adorable. I was working hard to not just let out a "daw" and rush over to hug them. Sometimes it sucks having to pretend to be dumb, I thought as I stayed put, staring blankly at the group. Pinkie placed the foals on the ground near some toys and walked towards Twilight with her usual bounce in her steps. I kept my gaze on her as she approached. I wasn't scared of her, just wary. I had seen that hyperactive sugar rush of Avera do things that defied logic and basic physics. I asked Twilight about it once, and she told me that she also had a hard time accepting it at first. So to save me the headache, she told me that Pinkie was just being Pinkie, and left it at that. As Twilight started to talk to Pinkie and Applejack, Fluttershy sat nearby, trying not to be noticed. When I noticed that Rainbow Dash or Rarity weren't here, I began to wonder where they could be. Rarity, I suppose, I could understand. I was here after all. Looking around at the group, I decided I was probably not going to get much attention. Tuning out the noise around me, I took the chance to lean against a wall and close my eyes, deciding that I'd take a nap and catch some more sleep. Twilight might be able to work efficiently with only 3 hours of sleep, but I sure didn't. After some time, maybe 10 minutes or so, I wasn't exactly paying attention. I felt something gently poking my leg. Not wanting to open my eyes, I remained still and tried to ignore the feeling. Unfortunately, the culprit had something else in mind. Soon, something was climbing up on my lap, and I felt 2 small things poking my chest. Opening my eyes, I saw that one of the foals Pinkie had brought with her, the little unicorn filly, was standing in my lap, her little hooves pressed against my chest. Her blue eyes were looking up at me with curiosity. I just blankly looked back at her. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do about the little one, I heard a small gasp come from Fluttershy.
Girls? Girls? Girls?
Her quiet voice was finally heard after she had repeated it several times to get her friend's attention. I didn't dare move my head as the filly leaned closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her glance at Fluttershy in confusion.
What is it, Fluttershy?
Twilight asked.
Look.
The timid Pegasus said, pointing a hoof towards me. Her friends looked where she was pointing and took in the strange sight. A foal standing on my lap and looking up at me while I remained perfectly still.
Oh, pony feathers! Twy, has a human interacted with foals before?
Applejack asked, nervousness clear in her voice.
I don't believe so.
Twilight told her. I knew she wasn't afraid that it would hurt the foal, but apparently she wasn't sure exactly how I would react. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Sparky.
I hope he isn't territorial. Or one that doesn't like young ones. Humans can be very aggressive, even to their own young sometimes. Usually the males, if they get annoyed or provoked.
I furrowed my brow slightly at that information. Humans are aggressive towards their own young? Mr. Cake seemed to finally have noticed where the foal was. What are you waiting for? Get her out of there! His voice sounded slightly panicky as he turned towards Applejack.
It's not that simple, Mr. Cake. If we approach him now, he could become aggressive towards Pumpkin or us, and then the foal could get hurt.
Oh, come on. That's profiling. I hope this doesn't get too out of hand. Just then, Mrs. Cake walked out of the kitchen. Well, there goes that prayer out the window. Confused as to what everyone was panicking about, she followed their gazes towards me. Her eyes widened as she saw her daughter looking up at me, poking my chin with her hoof. I groaned inwardly as her expression turned to fear and panic.
Pumpkin!
She shrieked.
Quiet, Mrs. Cake. If we agitate him somehow, she could get hurt.
Applejack cautioned. Stop making the situation worse. I was still looking at the filly that was perched in my lap, looking up at me with her curious eyes. Those adorable blue eyes. Deciding that I was already in trouble, I couldn't help myself any longer. Slowly, I started to raise my hand, trying my hardest not to startle the little thing. A collective gasp filled the room when they saw me lift my hand towards the foal. Everyone was holding their breath. Applejack looked ready to charge me, something I prayed to God she wouldn't do. Fluttershy and Mrs. Cake looked ready to faint, and Twilight was looking at me with a neutral expression. Yeah, just keep staring, Twilight. It's not like I could use your help or anything. Moving with the utmost care, I placed my hand on top of the foal's head and started to pat and rub her mane in a friendly manner. The filly, Pumpkin as everyone was calling her, started to giggle and laugh at my actions, making it harder for me to keep a straight face. She was pretty damn cute. A sigh went around the room. Everyone started to breathe again once they heard the foal laughing, and realized that I wasn't going to hurt her. I flinched slightly when Pinkie Pie suddenly appeared beside me, and she picked up the foal from my lap. Pumpkin's eyes started to water, and soon she began to cry. Pinkie tried to get her to stop crying while she carried her away, but the foal raised her front hooves towards me, clearly not wanting to leave me. Well, it looks like I made a new friend today,
Oh, I know what to do.
Pinkie said. She put the foal down next to her brother, Pumpkin still with tears in her little eyes. Pinkie then galloped into the kitchen only to return seconds later with a bag of flour. What was the flour for?
This should do the trick. Whoa!
Pinkie accidentally slipped on something and the flour bag went sailing through the air. It didn't take a genius to guess where it was headed. That's right, towards me. The bag hit me right on the chest, and unfortunately for me, it burst open. As a result, I was now covered in flour.
Oops, my bad. Sorry, Twilight.
Pinkie Pie laughed, looking at her friend. The twins seemed to like it, though, and were beginning to giggle in the background. I just sat there, blinking the flour out of my eyes. Twilight sighed and turned towards Mr. and Mrs. Cake.
Do you mind if I use your bathroom to clean him up?
Of course, dear.
Mrs. Cake said, picking up her daughter and checking to make sure she was all right. The filly continued to look at me, giggling loudly.
I'll help you get his clothes off then.
Pinkie cheered. Wait, what?
Good idea. Those probably need to be cleaned as well.
Added Applejack. What? Before I could move, Pinkie had somehow taken off my flour-covered shirt. Holding it up, she had a big smile on her face. Luckily for me and my dignity, I still had on my pair of baggy shorts. I was now sitting with my upper body exposed. As I've mentioned before, I have become more muscular as of late due to Rainbow, and unfortunately for me, it showed. I can't say that I expected the reactions this time round. I couldn't see any difference in Pinkie Pie's reaction other than her already big smile growing on her face. Fluttershy, however, was blushing, her cheeks bright red. As I watched, her wings flared out widely, and she tried to hide her face behind her pink mane. Applejack was looking at me with some interest, looking at me up and down like she was inspecting me. Twilight was looking away with a little bit of a blush on her cheeks. Mrs. Cake was looking at me with big eyes and her cheeks were beginning to turn pink. Carrot took one look at me and snorted before glancing at his wife, his eyebrow raised. I don't like their expressions. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
My, Twilight. Your human sure looks like he's a fine breed.
Applejack said, breaking the silence. She then looked down at my groin with her front hoof under her chin, looking thoughtfully. Her cheeks were starting to turn pink.
If he's as fine down there as what I'm seeing up here, I may have some females that he could breed with if you don't mind, Twilight. Of course, I'll pay you a standard breeding fee.
What? Oh, hell no! Fluttershy gave off a small eep as she looked ready to faint on the spot. I somehow kept my poker face and didn't blush, but it wasn't easy. Twilight shook her head, and with her magic she picked me up and headed for the stairs. I fought off the feeling of vertigo as I flew through the air.
Thanks for the offer, Applejack. I'll think about it. But for now, I will decline that offer.
She quickly said, trying to hide her blush as well. Pinkie Pie giggled at me floating beside her as we were heading up the stairs. I could see Twilight starting to blush more before she rushed to the bathroom and closed the door, with me in tow. Sadly, the door didn't have a lock, so it looked like she would be forced to clean me. I had other plans, however. Twilight, make sure no one comes inside while I bathe, okay? Looking around, I saw what looked like what I expect from a pony bathroom. Only small changes, such as the height of the toilet and sink. The bathtub was big, wide, and made of wood, kind of like the old ones you would see in old Western films. It seemed big enough for me to fit. On the shelves beside it, bottles of different kinds were displayed. Twilight nodded and we began to fill the bathtub with water. Then I quickly stripped down and jumped in, beginning to scrub and bathe while Twilight turned away from me and watched the door. It didn't take me long before I finished and quickly got out of the bathtub. Twilight levitated a small towel towards me, still turned away from me, but I could see her cheeks were flushed. I was just about to grab it when we heard the clopping of hooves coming up the stairs. We both froze. Thinking quickly, Twilight turned towards me and made me sit down on the floor. She then took the towel and started to rub my head with it, acting like she was the one drying me off. The door opened and both Mr. and Mrs. Cake were standing in the doorway with some more towels on their backs.
I just remembered that we only had one towel left up here.
Mrs. Cake said.
The rest were downstairs in the laundry room, so here are some more.
She then stepped forward and presented the towels to Twilight. As she did so, she caught a good look at my crotch, and her cheeks started to turn bright red. Unfortunately, due to my position, I couldn't cover myself even if I wanted to. I just hoped that Twilight would cover me, but she didn't seem to have noticed. She was looking straight at my chest, trying to look busy, a small blush on her cheeks as well.
Thanks, Miss Cake.
She said. I saw that Carrot was also glancing at my junk before snorting and looking away. He looked towards his wife, who was still looking at my crotch. Her big eyes were locked on target with her mouth slightly open, and I thought I saw some drool leaking from it too. Oh God. Please. No. No, 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 no. Honey bun? Carrot asked, poking his wife in the shoulder. Mrs. Cake seemed to be snapped out of her trance-like state, and she shook her head before putting the towels down on one of the bathtub shelves. I still saw her sneaking glances towards my groin every now and then. She was biting her lower lip and had an expression like she was thinking about how to say something. Oh God, what did I do to deserve this?
There you go, dear.
Mrs. Cake finally said, still taking another glance towards my junk. I didn't like the look in her eyes. Then let's go, honey bun, and leave Miss Twilight to take care of her human. He looked and sounded a little impatient, having seen his wife stealing glances at my lower parts. I figured that's why he was acting so blunt. Yes, let the jealousy flow through you and get your wife out of here. Mrs. Cake seemed to be having an inner battle with herself, but she slowly turned and headed towards the bathroom door. I saw that Carrot had exited the room already, having disappeared from view. I could hear his hoof steps further down the corridor, heading towards the stairs. Mrs. Cake stopped by the entrance and looked over her shoulder. As she looked at me, she did something that nearly gave me a heart attack, and also nearly made me lose my poker face. She moved her tail to the side and flashed me a look at her private parts. My heart stopped as I realized, to my shock, that she was showing me her, marehood. Unfortunately for me, I found it to be strangely arousing. Oh God, kill me now, please. I have seen the lady parts of one or two girls before, even before I ended up in Equestria. Hell, the ponies here are walking around naked most of the time anyways. Sure, the mares cover their private parts with their tails so a stallion doesn't get a free show, but since I was a human, they weren't so guarded like that towards me. Sometimes I think mares show me their privates, or almost do it on purpose, to try to get some kind of reaction from me, or play some sort of game, one where I didn't know the rules. I'm not completely oblivious, though. I know that humans here are sometimes used for satisfying certain desires. It didn't make it any less awkward for me when I was flashed by a pony, however. Seeing her wink at me, and not with her eyes, my little buddy treacherously responded by giving a little jolt of anticipation. My face flushed, and I prayed to whatever God was listening that the floor would open up and swallow me whole. Mrs. Cake noticed my reaction, and her eyes got a little bigger. Her blush deepened as she looked away. I saw her smiling before she exited the room, flicking her tail towards me and swaying her hips a little more than before. She looked as if she just won something special. Twilight had turned away during all this to clean up the bathtub and put away the shampoo, so she didn't see what had transpired. At the moment, I didn't know how to tell her what happened. Hopefully I would be able to tell her later when we were back at the library. "Twilight, it's time to go," I signed, still staring off into space. Confused, she just nodded and with her magic levitated over a large towel and put it around my waist. She then picked up my flower-covered clothes and headed towards the door. I followed her downstairs, completely numb. I saw Twilight's friends sitting around a table talking about something. I could hear some words like bodyguard, rich mare, foal sitter, and such before they stopped and turned their attention towards me and Twilight. When Fluttershy saw my slightly damp, half-naked self, she blushed and her wings locked up again.
Girls, I have to take Max home and get him a new set of clothes,
Twilight said, waving the flower-covered garments in the air.
Aww.
Pinkie said, looking sad. Suddenly, her face lit up again and she rushed off into the kitchen. Shortly after, she returned with a box wrapped in a bow.
Here, Twilight. Some cupcakes for you and Max.
As Twilight accepted the package, Applejack stepped forward and looked at her.
Would you mind if I talk to you for a minute?
She then looked up at me for a second before looking back at Twilight.
Sure, Applejack.
Twilight said, giving her a smile.
In private?
Applejack said, looking pointedly at Fluttershy and Pinkie Pie.
Okay, Applejack.
Twilight said, looking a little confused. Twilight put me inside the human area again. Then Applejack and Twilight walked to the other side of the room and started to talk. Pinkie Pie was talking to Fluttershy about something by the window, so I sat down and crossed my arms while Twilight spoke with Applejack. I just wanted to get home, put on some clean clothes, and forget about what had happened. But it seemed that was going to be put on hold. I watched Mrs. Cake as she trotted in from another room by the displays. She looked around and spotted Twilight and Applejack talking in the corner, and Pinkie entertaining Fluttershy by the window. She then looked in my direction and slowly started to walk towards me. As I watched her draw nearer, I started wondering what she was up to. She walked up until she was standing right in front of me, her cheeks a rosy color. She then glanced around to see if anybody was looking at us. Seeing that no one was watching, she lifted one of her front hooves and patted me on the head. So she only wanted to pet me? I'm okay with that. But then her hoof started to travel downwards, starting at my face, then working down to my chest, followed by my stomach, rubbing her hoof across my skin the whole time. Her cheeks were starting to become more red, and her breathing got heavier while she explored and felt my skin and muscles. She then took a glance towards my towel. "Aw, hell no," I silently whimpered. There was no way I could voice my protest or resist without causing me to look bad. She licked her lips and was bending down towards the towel. Her mouth was partly open, ready to remove the towel. Fortunately, before she reached the towel, and what was hidden beneath it, we heard a voice from behind her.
Mrs. Cake?
Mrs. Cake's eyes got comically big, and she turned quickly towards the sound. I couldn't help but notice her private parts again while she was facing away, as my face was the same level as her flanks. Her generous rear was almost in my face. Her nether lips were wetter now, and I could see trails of liquid on them, with some traveling down her inner thighs. I winced slightly, but I couldn't help but stare, my face red again. Is she... Why? Twilight, who seemed to have finished talking with Applejack, was walking towards me and Mrs. Cake. Applejack was looking at the scene with a knowing smirk on her face.
Why are you near Max? And what were you doing?
Twilight asked, confusion on her face.
Nothing, dear. Just making sure the towel was on.
Mrs. Cake lied, clenching her hind legs together slightly. Pinkie Pie was instantly there by my side, giggling and with a huge smile on her face.
She was also rubbing her hoof on his chest and tummy. She seemed to have so much fun doing it. She was then bending down, trying to correct the towel, I think. And she would have used her mouth to do it. And she also had this funny expression on her face. But wouldn't it have been easier if she used her hoof instead?
Pinky put a hoof under her chin and had a thoughtful expression. Twilight was looking at Mrs. Cake with an expression I couldn't quite place. It looked kind of like suspicion, but I wasn't too sure. Twilight's horn glowed and my leash was lifted into the air by her magic.
Well, it's time for me and Max to go. So, goodbye, every pony.
Her friends and Mrs. Cake said goodbye, and Twilight quickly led me towards the entrance to the shop. Before I exited, however, I couldn't help but take another glance back. I saw Mrs. Cake looking back at me, with an almost hungry look on her eyes. I shuddered a little, and followed Twilight. We exited the shop quickly, and she trotted towards the marketplace, me by her side. Once we got a safe distance away, she leaned towards me and whispered,
Max, what was that all about?
I told her about what Mrs. Cake did when she came into the room, looking away as my face lit up. Twilight had a disgusted expression on her face. As I finished, she seemed to trot closer to me, almost like she was trying to protect me. It was cute, in a weird sort of way. I could feel her tail touch me every now and then as we walked. We continued in silence for several minutes before a thought struck me. Twilight, what did you and Applejack talk about? I asked, glancing down at her. This time it was Twilight's turn to look away, her cheeks taking on a pinkish hue.
Nothing, Max.
Twilight? She flinched slightly, her wings twitching at her side.
Oh, all right.
She said, her head lowering slightly.
She was asking me if I could take you to our farm and let her run some tests on you.
Oh, I don't like the sound of that. Tests?
Yeah, tests that would measure your intelligence, endurance, and some other stuff.
Twilight said, refusing to meet my gaze. She fell silent again as I watched the buildings pass by as we walked. Did you agree to it? I asked finally.
I told her I would think about it.
Did she say when? I asked, eyes on the mail mare as she flew by, upside down. How does she do that without any letters falling out?
She wanted to do them later this month, unless I agreed to do it sooner.
Not much more was said after that. As we got to the marketplace, we turned down the path that led to the library. After a few minutes of walking, I could just see the top of the tree further ahead. Twilight looked like she was thinking hard about something, glancing at me periodically. She would look away whenever I turned my head in her direction, and her cheeks would turn a light pink every time she did. Her behavior made me wonder just what these tests she and Applejack talked about entailed. We soon arrived at the library and entered our home. Twilight headed into the kitchen to drop the box with the cupcakes, and I headed into the living room. Throwing the towel into the corner of the room, I reached behind the couch and slipped on one of the extra sets of clothing that Twilight had somehow convinced Rarity to make. With a loud sigh, I collapsed on the couch. There was a sound of footsteps below me as Twilight made her way upstairs.
Max?
She asked tentatively. I looked up and motioned for her to join me. She trotted over and slipped up on the couch, snuggling up next to me.
I'm sorry about what happened today.
She mumbled, her head resting on her hooves. It's okay. It's not your fault. Scratching behind her ear, I returned to staring at the ceiling. Twilight shifted next to me, leaning closer.
What are you going to do about Applejack's offer?
She asked tentatively, her voice hesitant as if she feared the answer. I sighed, closing my eyes. If it's all the same to you, I think I'll decline the offer for now, I replied, opening my eyes and glancing at my friend. Her ears perked up and a small smile spread across her face.
Okay.
She said, laying her head back down.
I'll tell her next time I see her that we aren't interested.
Closing her eyes, she snuggled even closer to me. I'm not sure if it was the stress of the day or the fact that she had very little sleep the night before, but Twilight was soon fast asleep. I just laid there, my arm around her, staring up at the ceiling. I was thinking hard. Why am I getting so flustered about ponies making advances on me? They're ponies. I'm a human. Sure, some of them are really good looking, but I certainly don't like any of them that way. An image of Twilight flashed through my mind, a cute smile on her face as her eyes lit up, her laugh that seemed to light up the room, the eager way she tried to learn everything and anything new. I felt my face flush again as I glanced over at the sleeping mare in my arms. I don't like any of them that way. Right?